there are different spaces in this home for men and women. As you might have been able to guess from the coloring here, we've just entered a women's room. Many wealthy Canadians used to split their homes up like this. The theory was it gave everybody a chance to be in charge and in control. Inside men's rooms, men would outrank women, and inside women's rooms, women would outrank men. How seriously each family took these rules would have varied from home to home. We know that McNabb's home is split up like this, but we also know they don't seem to have actually practiced these rules in their daily lives, so it might have been just for show. The purpose of this room is to entertain the family's guests. If they had more guests than they could fit into this room, those doors behind you are glass doors. They can swing open and the party could spill out onto the lawn. If the family would like a servant to enter their part of the home and do some work for them, they're actually not allowed to enter the servants' quarters. That's traditionally not something they're supposed to do. Instead, they need a way to signal them, which they would do by ringing the bell pull. Over by the fireplace, there's a little wheel with a handle on it. That handle pulls a wire which runs down through the floor into the basement, where it rings one of a set of bells. The servants would memorize what each bell in the home sounds like, so they can tell based on what they're hearing what room they need to go to next. I have one last thing to talk about in here. We've got a portrait of a little girl on the wall. Her name is Sophia McNabb. She's the McNabb's middle child. Sophia is very important to us because she kept a diary when she was 13. That diary has survived to the present day. Much like how that auction list taught us what things were in the McNabb's house, Sophia's diary taught us what they used each of these rooms for. So that's one of the ways we figured out where those things should go. Sophia also has a very famous relative. She's Queen Camilla's great-great-great-grandmother. Because of this connection between the McNabbs and the British royal family, they've visited us in the past, and Queen Camilla serves as our museum's patron. Might have been, that's not very bright in here, so it wouldn't be very easy to read. The lights you're going to see throughout the home were originally gas lamps, so they burned coal gas to generate light. They would have been exactly as bright as these electric lights are today, 10 candles worth of light. That's not very bright at all by modern standards. It actually should be darker in here though. We turn the lights on in the day because people are used to it, but light used to be incredibly expensive in Canada. Most families spent $1 out of every $10 they had on the stuff, so you would never use it while the sun was still up. You'd want to save money with that wherever possible. Inconveniently, the sun moves around in the sky during the day, so at the time people were moving around inside their homes to follow it. During the morning, the sun is over there, so that's when it'd be best to be on this side of the house. But by now, the sun is making its way over there, so they're probably moving to the long side of the house if they want to read.
Wow.
The McNabbs have a little step ladder that they can use to grab a book from the top shelf if they like. And once they've grabbed that, they can turn this back into a chair so they have a place to sit.
That's cool.
At the end of this hallway, we have the smoking room. The smoking room exists because at the time, Canadians are convinced that tobacco smells so bad, they considered it rude to smoke where a lady might smell you. So the smokers would need a room where that smell could be contained. They need a door they could shut behind them, they need a wash basin to clean the smoke off their face, and they need to put on their smoking jacket and smoking cap. That way, if the smoke got on their clothes, they could strip that layer off and leave it behind. McNabb's dining room is very large. One of the reasons it's so large is that they'd have a large amount of guests over. And those guests would be spending a lot of time in this room. A Victorian dinner party could go on for 4 hours or more. The reason it could go on for long is that they like to serve a large amount of courses. Today, we usually make people one plate of food, but traditionally you would make 5. The first thing you brought out would be some soup. The second thing you'd bring out would be the fish. The third thing you brought out would be the main course. The fourth thing you were served would be the cheese platter, and then the final thing you were served would be the pudding. If you go to a wealthy person's home, they might have given you a little menu so you could select between a variety of options for each of those courses, sort of like going to a fancy wedding. We know that sometimes the cook down in the basement here had to make 20 or more dishes of food when the guests are over, and not just so everybody could have a few options to pick between. That means that there's going to be a huge amount of leftovers in this home. Those leftovers would be saved for as long as possible, but if anything rotted or spoiled before they could finish it off, the McNabbs probably turned that into animal feed. Pigs can eat old rotting food without getting sick, so many families in Canada would keep a pig to use as their recycling system. At the time, they called garbage hogwash because your garbage is what your pig eats, and your hog will turn it into more meat for you. There are many portraits on the walls in this home. These are a great way at the time to show your guests who you're connected to in society. There are three kinds of portraits people were buying back then. The really cheap kind is just a painting of your face. A more expensive kind is what you paint down to your waist, so you can hold an object in your hands. What object you pick will teach the guests something about you. In the painting behind you, we have Alan's wife, Mary. Mary has chosen to hold a piece of cloth on her arm over there, and that piece of cloth is the tartan of the clan Stewart. So she's telling her guests,
Same as the curtains in the library?
yes it is. So she's telling her guests what's important about me is I'm part of this clan back in Scotland. Mary's mother is named Sophia, just like her daughter. She's chosen to hold her Bible in her hand. So she's telling her guests what's important about me is that I'm a very religious person. She's also telling us something else. She's bought the third kind of portrait you could buy, the full body job.
Full of money.
If anybody's ever told you it cost me an arm and a leg, that is actually what they're talking about. It's so expensive to paint your entire body that we still use it as a way to complain about how much things cost today. So she's telling us her family has a lot of money. The reason her family is doing so well is, at the time, Canada is run by small groups of families who work together to control the government. They're almost like aristocrats are back in Europe. In Ontario, we call these families the family compact. Alan's family, the McNabs, and Mary's family, the Stewarts, are both part of this family compact, so they're very lucky and privileged people. Now, you might have noticed we don't run our province this way anymore. That's because most Canadians didn't like it very much. In 1937, we had a large rebellion. The rebels wanted to get rid of these ruling families, and then they wanted Canada to leave the British Empire, become a republic like the United States is. Most countries in the Americas have their War of Independence. Traditionally, we don't talk about the Canadian War of Independence very often. That might be because it embarrasses us a little bit. We're one of the only countries around here to lose ours. One of the reasons the rebels lose is Alan McNabb. This is the servants' hall.
Wow.
This is where our servants will eat their meals and spend their free time. The women among the servants had their bedrooms at the end of the hallway. There would have been 2 or 3 people in each of those beds. At the time, that's considered pretty good. Back then, most families only have 1 bed, so most people are used to sharing with more people than just 2. The men among the servants are not so lucky. They slept in the hayloft above that coach house we started our turnout. Over here we have our workroom. The workroom is where you'd find the servants for much of their working day. Now, believe it or not, being a servant was considered a very good job at the time. There were always many more applicants than there were people who could afford to pay one. That's because servants were paid incredibly well by the standards of their day. Back then, in addition to the money a servant was paid, their employer was on the hook for their cost of living. So a servant never had to buy any food. It's all provided by their employer, 3 meals a day.
Wow.
They don't have to pay any rent. They get a place to sleep in their employer's home. They don't have to buy their own clothes or tools, and their employers even give them several pints of beer to drink every day. All of this adds up to a servant never needing to spend the money they're paid, so every dollar they make is pure profit. It can go straight into their savings. What most people in Canada were saving up for was their own farm, and at the time that would have cost you about $200. Most servants would only work for a few years and then they'd quit. That's because after a few years they have that $200. So now they could buy a farm. They could move from the lower class into the middle class. Over here we've got the paper.